This episode is sponsored by Romanwell. Does your Google search contain something along the lines of, what can I eat with IBD? Are you stressing about how to navigate food choices at an upcoming wedding, family vacation, or graduation party? Don't worry. The IBD dietitians at Romanwell have got you covered. They're here to help you safely expand your diet and build your confidence in food selection by providing the one-on-one support and tools you need to navigate nutrition through all of life's phases. Go to romanwell.com to apply for a free consultation so you can start feeling and living well.
Hi, I'm Alicia.
And I'm Robin, and you're listening to Bowel Moments,
the podcast sharing real talk about the realities of IBD. Served on the rocks. This week, we talked to Dr. Tim Ritter. Dr. Ritter is the Senior Medical Director at the GI Alliance and leads their clinical trials program. He's been in private practice seeing primarily inflammatory bowel disease patients for more than 30 years. We talked to him about clinical trials, big surprise, and the concept of medical homes that the GI Alliance is developing. We also rail against the insurance companies and discuss his love of bourbon. Cheers.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Bowel Moments. This is Robin.
Hey guys, this is Alicia, and we are delighted to be joined by Dr. Tim Ritter. And Dr. Ritter, you are with the GI Alliance, which is an absolutely massive group of gastroenterologists throughout the country now, I believe, right?
Right. And we stretch from Florida to Washington State, Houston to Chicago.
Wow. You got even bigger than the last time I talked to you, so that's really exciting.
Yeah, we're up to about 1,600 providers now.
Wow. Very cool. And you have kind of a specific aspect within GI Alliance, and we'll definitely get to that. But of course, we start out with the very unacademic question of, what are you drinking?
I'm having a bourbon, and I'm a fan of many different bourbons. This is a Four Roses.
Okay. Now, what is the difference between a bourbon and a scotch?
Well, now you're going to ask me a technical question. I think the bourbons have to be made in Kentucky.
Yes.
But I'm not positive.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
I do believe that's true. I do believe that is true.
And I suppose scotch has to be made in Scotland then, probably?
Yeah, to be Scotch whiskey has to be made in Scotland, and it depends on how you spell whiskey. But they are basically all different forms of whiskey.
Okay. All right. Sorry, that was a real curveball I threw you on that one. You're welcome.
It's all right. If I drink a lot more, I'll probably have a better answer.
Oh, great. We'll ask you again at the end, and we'll see if it changes. Robin, what are you drinking?
I made a cocktail tonight. I'm having a little vodka, a little cranberry, a little soda, a little lime.
I am drinking a rosé today because it's still cold in Minnesota. I'm sitting here wearing a sweater, as you guys can tell. And so I'm trying to will summer into being by drinking a rosé. And there's nothing more summery than a rosé. This isn't about drinking, it's about IBD. So Dr. Ritter, what brought you into our IBD community? What made you choose IBD as your specialty?
You know, I started out just in general gastroenterology 30 years ago. And as my practice evolved, I just found IBD to be by far the most challenging. Plus, it was really, I thought, the opportunity to where you could tangibly help patients. I mean, you could see patients who were sick and better. So about 10 to 15 years ago, I just basically talked to my partners about letting me, get away from the routine colon cancer screening stuff that really is the foundation of most gastroenterology practices, and just concentrate on something I really like. And my partners are very gracious and agreed to do that. So since then, I've been just seeing IBD for the last 10 or 15 years, mostly just out of intellectual interest, and because they're challenging and a lot of docs don't have the time to spend with these complicated cases. And I find it very, very fulfilling.
Like a puzzle, I would imagine.
Like a puzzle, yeah.
And your partners were probably very happy to hand IBD off to you, from what I understand, as an IBD patient.
I think my partners really like also seeing IBD, but they also really like having someone next door that they can bounce things off of, who really makes an effort to really keep up on all the most recent and up-to-date things, and provide them I wouldn't say a safety net, but a resource to help with their care.
Very nice way to put it. I love it.
That is a nice way to put it. And I'm glad you brought up research, because that has actually become your niche within this sort of group, is really looking at clinical trials for IBD. So talk to us about that, because we have had people on that do research. And so of course they do clinical trials, but this really is your baby. You built this up within the GI Alliance, and you know so much about it. So talk to us about How you built that, and then what are clinical trials if you're a patient that doesn't really understand it very well?
Sure. I mean, I got started in this probably 10 years ago when the PREVENT trial was started. It was a trial that was looking at if you could take patients that were recently operated on and make a difference in their recurrence rates by aggressively treating them immediately post-operative. And we had never done trials before. And frankly, at the time, I had no idea that a community practice could do trials. It had never really occurred to me. And I was talking to the MSL from that company, and he was saying, well, you want to do this? And I'm like, well, I have no clue how to do this. But with a little bit of help, we hired a coordinator, started that trial. And then as our group began to grow, we began to realize that really, if we wanted to do trials, we either needed to do them really big or just shut down. It really wasn't something that we wanted to do part-time. So at that point, I scaled back my practice probably by about 80%. We hired not just a coordinator, but a staff. And we hired someone out of the pharma industry. We hired someone that had been doing clinical trials for 10 or 15 years from the other side, not from the clinical side, but from the pharma side. And he and I basically just built a program where our goal was, the goal is always number one, let's provide the best care for a patient. So let's choose trials that really benefit patients. But then goal number two was let's really try to enroll them effectively and provide good quality care and then good quality data back to the industry so that we can bring some of these new products to market so that all the patients can use them. And so it really just kind of became a passion, mostly just because I'm a total science nerd, but just a passion to really do something new and unique and then offer our patients something they couldn't get just anywhere else.
I'm going to ask a first follow-up question. This is probably not the natural follow-up to what you just said, but a lot of patients, in my experience, I think that patients associate clinical trials with last resort. Like they've tried all the medicines, and so they go into a clinical trial to see if that works. But it's my understanding that that's not necessarily the case. Like a clinical trial should not be your last resort because maybe the sickest patients are not the best candidates for a clinical trial. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, talking about all the time. Clinical trials are absolutely not the last resort. And if you look at them that way, then you're really denying access to many, many patients. The very first time I see a patient, clinical trials are part of the continuum of opportunities in terms of treating these patients. It's not that every patient should go on a trial day one, but if you wait until they've failed, 5 or 6 different medications and different mechanisms, they often won't qualify for the trials because the trials are not going to spend their time on patients that they don't think they have a reasonable chance of helping. And so really a clinical trial is for a variety of different patients. Sometimes patients don't have the resources to get medicines that are available, or their insurance companies are so obstructionist that they can't, even with good insurance, they can't access good medications, in which case patients can go on trials and get access basically to tomorrow's medication today. Other sets of patients, are frustrated with their current and just want to try something different. Some patients are just very altruistic and say, hey, if I can do something that's going to really help, push science forward. And then some patients recognize the scientific interest in the trial and why some of these new mechanisms that we're taking are not only more effective than the current medications, but are safer. People always think of a trial as, well, I'm a guinea pig. And certainly in very, very early phase trials, that's true. You are a guinea pig. But in the late phase trials, you're not. And as a community practice, we choose our trials very, very carefully. We don't take trials that are sort of highly experimental, if you want to say. We usually pick trials that already have an established safety record through the phase 1 and phase 2 data. We take trials of medications that have a reasonably good chance of being highly successful based on either like-minded medications already on the market or sometimes just with really good, preclinical data and then early phase data that have been done at other places that take a more open approach to enrolling clinical trials. So we don't do phase 1 trials, and we don't do very many early phase 2. We do mostly late phase 2, phase 3, where they're really trying to enroll sick patients on a drug with already an established track record of both safety and efficacy.
The nice thing about trials too is that the trials that you're conducting, the control medication is a medication that's already established. So it's not like people are going without treatment. They are getting a medication, just not the study medication, right?
Not always. We do take placebo-controlled trials, and in some cases, placebo can mean they're on nothing, but we never take a trial that leaves them on placebo for very long. So they may have to put up with the placebo for 6 weeks or 8 weeks, but every trial we take treats the placebo group appropriately in that they will either roll them over immediately into a maintenance phase with the medication or into an open label access to the medication. I would never enroll a patient in a trial where they got put on placebo and then when they didn't do well, they got kind of booted off the trial. And those trials do exist, but they're just not, in my mind, they're not the way a community patient-facing practice wants to take care of patients. And so we don't do trials like that. Many patients, just as you said, in the placebo group are on some degree of standard of care medications. It often can be immunomodulators like Imuran or 6-MP. Sometimes it's steroids, which then the goal is, of course, to get them off those as quickly as possible. And then some trials will have active comparators where they go on the study medicine, but then they go on a really highly effective other medication like ustekinumab or Humira or something like that that's out there. So they go on a medication that we know works just as a comparator to the trial drug. So there are many, many different types of trial designs.
So you have a patient that walks in the door, new patient to you or to one of your partners. When and how do you bring up participation in a clinical trial, and what education do you provide them at that stage? And then how does that evolve after they've maybe agreed?
I am very fortunate in that because of the nature of my practice, I get to spend a lot of time with patients, particularly in that initial visit and in follow-up visits, because patients rarely remember more than a fraction of what you tell them. But we do spend a lot of time. We spend a lot of time talking about the disease. We also spend a lot of time talking about the risk of untreated disease, because patients are going to look at medications, whether it's a trial or not, and they're going to see the risk of the medication. And they need to weigh that risk against the risk of not treating their disease. And so when I start then talking about therapy for patients, depending on whether they have Crohn's or UC, we'll go through the whole gamut of what's out there, the different types of medications, how they're used, how they're administered, sort of what the advantages and disadvantages of the medications are. But in that conversation, somewhere I will bring up clinical trials. I may mention, hey, one of the drugs we use a lot in ulcerative colitis is vedolizumab, but there's another drug very similar to that in a trial. And there are reasons to think it might be better. There are reasons to think, I would never say it might be safer because vedolizumab is incredibly safe. But I would also bring that up in the course of the conversation as though the clinical trial isn't something extraordinary. It's part of the routine care of the patient. And most of the time, patients aren't interested. I mean, we know from data that only about 15% in any disease state of patients are interested in a trial. But it is amazing how often sometimes a patient will go, well, I could do a trial. And then you sort of talk to them more about the trial. You talk to them about the fact that trials are fairly intense, and meaning that there's a lot of office visits early on. There's often a lot of blood drawn. Often there's an extra colonoscopy or two rolled in as part of the trial. But many patients view that as being, wow, I'm going to see my doctor a lot, or I'm going to see the trial team a lot, or I'm going to be really taken really good care of. And in a trial, you are taken good care of. You are watched like a hawk for every possible bad outcome or adverse event, or mostly just to watch you get better and make sure that we're making progress. One of the nice things about trials is that they're free to the patient. So they get their colonoscopies for free, their biopsies for free, they get their blood work for free, they get all their office visits for free. And in fact, most of the trials will actually reimburse the patient a little bit. It's not meant to be enough to incentivize someone to say, I want to get on a trial for money. That should not be the case. And if that is the case, the trial is designed wrong. But it should be enough to cover their gas and the fact they missed a day of work and this and that sort of thing, so that it's not an economic burden to the patient. And then right after I tell the patient that it's all free, then I say, but really, it's not free because you have to give with your time. So while you don't have to pay any money, you do have to show up for every office visit that's on the protocol. There's no skipping them. You have to show up for the colonoscopy, and then they're going to give you this diary that you have where you have to sit down every day and enter how many bowel movements you had and how much blood you had and how much pain you have. And if you don't do it every day, we're going to be calling you and bugging you about it. So it is really not free in terms of that, but it's really, a trial is really a partnership, and it's a partnership between the drug company providing all the materials, the physician running the trial, the coordinator who does the vast majority of the work, and then a patient who takes the time to invest and put their trust into a process that can get them better.
That's a really invaluable partnership right there. But I could see how some people would really like that. Like you said, there's that additional care that you're getting, but also like just tracking all your symptoms and learning about your disease.
I'm like, sign me up right now. I don't even know if I qualify. I probably don't.
I can't tell you how many times patients will finish a trial and their first question is, can I get on another trial? I need to get on another trial. They don't want to lose that process, that sort of connectivity and white glove, concierge service that you sort of get on the trial.
That's funny. Do you ask them to either change or to not change anything else that they're doing? Like, I know a lot of our folks change their diets or go to start seeing a psychologist or do things. Do you say, hey, during this time, don't do anything different other than these things that I tell you?
So that's very complicated. So we do always have open to them to see our dietitian and to see our social worker that does cognitive therapy for anxiety and depression as well. That's always available to patients. And those are really not part of the interventional drug trials that we do. So there's no contraindication to them doing that. And so some of them will take advantage of that. Some of them will not. What we do that is very difficult is they have to stop their current medication. Now, honestly, if their current medication was doing a really good job, I would turn them down. I wouldn't put them on a trial. And I turn down people all the time who come in and say they want to do a trial. I'm like, why? You're fine. This is crazy. You don't need this. So, but obviously, if they're not doing well on their current medication, then we have to stop that and they have to get that medication out of their system. And a lot of the medications we use have fairly long half-lives, meaning they stay in the body for weeks. And so sometimes you'll have to carry someone along on no medication for 4 weeks or 6 weeks. And that's rough. And it requires a lot of sort of management with, sometimes you use a little bit of prednisone or some budesonide or things that will carry them along during that washout period so that they can screen and enroll in a trial. And then honestly, I think that's one of the biggest reasons both physicians are reluctant to send patients for trials, and also the patients, when they hear about the trial, that's probably one of the main things that they balk at about enrolling on a trial. There are new guidelines for a lot of these trials that are getting around some of that. They're allowing us in some trials to actually check a drug level of the drug in the body rather than just assuming it's going to be there for 8 weeks. We can check one at 2 weeks and see if it's gone, that kind of thing, which I think is a huge step forward. And then also some of the very new drugs that we take, their half-life is extraordinarily short. So they're out of the system in no time. But that washout is a challenge.
Yeah, I would imagine that would be scary to patients.
Yep. And to their doctors and to me.
Yeah.
But it's necessary because you can't really have 2 drugs on board at the same time and know which one's really making the difference. It's just the nature of science.
Right. Yeah. No, to be scientifically sound, you have to do that.
Right.
So I am listening to a book at the moment. A lot of it has to do with the medical community and how some people have not been represented within clinical trials in the past, women in particular. This one is just focusing on women, but I do also know that it has been a bit of a struggle, it sounds like, to make sure that we're bringing in lots of different cultures and races into clinical trials as well as gender. So how are you working to ensure that a broad spectrum of people is represented within your clinical trials to give you the best data for everybody?
I wish I had a good answer for that. And I don't. I don't. I mean, I live in practice in a very homogenous community that is not very diverse. And so I don't do a good job in my particular trial site of addressing that. So I manage 21 different sites across the country. And many of our sites are in areas that are very ethnically diverse. And so we make up for it with those sites and getting patients enrolled. But I will just tell you, there are cultures out there that are very distrusting of the medical system in general. And it's very, very hard to enroll a patient in a clinical trial when there is a cultural distrust of doctors and the system. So it's sort of a two-edged sword. You'd like to enroll more diverse patients, but then the diversity hurts your recruiting as well because of preconceived, biases or discrimination or whatever. And unfortunately, it's not anything that happens today, but it's a black eye that the medical system earned with what happened, 50, 75 years ago in Tuskegee and a variety of other places where trials were not conducted in an ethical way.
Yeah. And the book that I'm reading talks about how in the past also they didn't consider women to be appropriate for clinical trials because of our delicate constitutions. And so that means that a lot of the dosages for things are based on the quote unquote average man and not the average woman. And at times that does change things. And so it's a really fascinating book. I did have to stop listening to it because I was just getting really mad. So I had to stop listening for a little bit.
Well, please send me the title because I'd love to listen to it. But yeah, I think that's probably true. If you don't have a population represented, then you always have to ask, how does that particular drug work in other subsets?
Well, and I'm curious if you're now seeing within the scientific literature even that acknowledgement that the patient population utilized in that trial is not diverse, like whether it's at least called out. So it's like, hey, this was a bunch of white guys and not as diverse as it could be.
So I will tell you, I do a lot of speaking. So when a new drug comes out, one of the things that I consider my obligation is, particularly if I was part of the trial, is that I want to take that information out and I want to teach my colleagues about the drug. And so I don't do a lot of national speaking, but I go around to my offices and we present all the trial data. And I will say that I think on the most part, most of the trials I've seen in the last 10 years have been at least, pretty darn close to 50-50 men and women. But there's no information on the racial and ethical and ethnic diversity in that data set that I recall. It may be that I have been given that information, just don't recall it, but I give these talks all the time. And I don't think that data is presented in any sort of meaningful way, which makes you think it's probably just as skewed as we think it is.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And yeah, I would imagine you would have recalled that. That seems like something you would remember.
I would think so, but
you're pretty attentive to details. I think you probably would have remembered that.
I think I would have. Now you got me curious to go back and look.
I'm sorry. I just threw a spanner into the works, as they say in England.
That's okay.
I am curious because we just did our research roundup episode here just a couple weeks ago where we had Ashish Patel and Anish Patel come on and join us, and they got talking about new treatments. And it sounds like there's some really exciting things coming down the pipeline. Tell us what you're most excited about and why.
You just mentioned two of my favorite people.
They are delightful. Yes.
We love them too, very much. Yeah.
Yeah, they're great. So I don't want to put out any big plugs for companies, but there are now being developed some drugs that have with them the ability to check certain genetic markers that predict response. So what we have had for the last 15 years in a disease like breast cancer, where if you were to show up, the first thing they do is take your tumor and genetically stratify you into XYZ, yada, yada, yada. And they'll come back and they'll say, this is your drug, with a personalized, genetically driven, approach to therapy. Right now, the way we pick a drug in IBD is, well, this is my favorite, let's give it a shot. And fortunately, we've got a lot of good drugs and that actually works most of the time. And we really don't do that. When we sit down with the patient and we think through what's going on, and we think through other extraintestinal things they have going on, and we think through just their whole history, family history, the disease phenotype, the characteristics. So we try to make very careful, thoughtful choices about drugs, but we don't really have anything where you can just draw a tube of blood or take a biopsy and say, hey, this drug's got a really good chance of working for you. And those are on the way. And I find that extraordinarily exciting. The first one's in trial now, and there's going to be a lot more in the future.
This episode is sponsored by Romanwell. Have you ever felt overwhelmed and unsure about what questions you should ask your doctor, or if you should get a referral to a dietitian? If so, you are not alone. The dietitians over at Romanwell help patients every day navigate these questions and many more. They've just released an amazing free resource for patients called the IBD Patient Starter Kit that is jam-packed with tips and tools to empower you to become your own best advocate. Check out the show notes or head on over to romanwell.com to download a copy of the IBD Patient Starter Kit today.
Is it going to be something like I can take my ancestry DNA results and hand them to you and you can, or
I
is
love
it
that so much? I hope that's the answer.
I think that's unlikely. I don't know enough about ancestry DNA to know, but I think that's unlikely. I think you're going to have to do but you're going to have to probably just swab your mouth. I mean, it's not like it's really hard. You have to do probably a specific genetic test looking for a very specific marker that I think would be highly unlikely to be available on ancestry DNA.
Probably. But I thought, kill two birds with one stone.
Absolutely.
I think that's
find your long lost brother, get your best Crohn's drug,
figure out that your dad wasn't really your dad, some very dramatic things.
Yeah, well, there's all kinds of things that do come up, right?
Yes, there's been some exciting things. That's a different podcast for a different day, though.
I was about to say I could go down that road with you too.
I know. We'll start a second one, Robin.
I was adopted, so I did the ancestry DNA thing just because I kind of wanted to know, and it was pretty interesting.
I am very excited about this idea of precision medicine. I do have concerns. I love the fact that you said the word obstructionist. That's going to go into my vernacular now because my first thought was that's all well and good, but our insurance company is going to actually go with this because it would save them money, presumably in the end.
One thing that insurance companies don't seem to really understand is that the most expensive drug is the one that doesn't work. I mean, if you spend 6 months or 9 months with a therapy that is not getting the patient anywhere, you're running the risk of, first of all, they're going to end up on more steroids. They're going to end up with more ER visits. They're going to end up with more hospitalizations. They're more likely to have surgery. Not to mention, just the sheer quality of life impairment you've put on these people. So I just get angry when I want to make a really good decision for a patient and then I get told that they have an algorithm that says I should do something different. I think it has to change. I don't know how you change it. They have the money. They're paying for the care. And I think unless patients revolt or employers who are purchasing the insurance stand up and say, no, you need to treat my employees better, I don't see it changing. So that I think the hope is there. And I think that one of the things that groups like ours and partnering with other people need to be doing more of is educating the patients on why we make the choices we choose, and educating their employers on that with proper care, we can keep their patients at work, which is where they want them, and can make everything better. But I really, if there's one thing that is just the worst part of my life, it is the hours I spend every week battling insurance companies to just let me do the right thing. And for every hour I spend, my poor PA and not nurse practitioner, my nurse and my PA, they spend 6 or 8 hours for every hour I spend. I get that things are expensive. I really do. But man, you get someone in remission and you keep them in remission, and there's a many, many, many months to years of money that doesn't get spent, that it gets spent on the people that are not in remission. Now, the problem is twofold with that. Insurance companies have two real fatal flaws to fixing the system. One is they just assume that someone that's on their insurance plan this year won't be on their plan next year. So why do they care about year 2, year 3, year 4, year 5? I just want to spend as little money as I can in the first 3 months. The other thing is, and I've had people tell me this on the phone, I'm sorry if they go to the hospital or to the emergency room, but that's not my budget. My budget is the drug. So if they go to the hospital, that impacts somebody else's budget.
What?
Which is, if you think about it, it's just appalling, because their pharmacy benefits are covered out of one pool of money, their hospital's out of another, and they don't care about the other pool of money.
I didn't even think about that. That is so fucking awful. Pardon my language around you, Dr. Ritter, but that is fucking criminal.
It's criminal. No, the criminal is the right word. It is the right word. And the other thing is, you get on these peer-to-peers, and I'll get on a peer-to-peer and I'll be talking to, a retired cardiothoracic surgeon who is probably a hell of a lot smarter than me, but doesn't know anything about Crohn's disease. Sorry, I mean, you're not helping me here. And then they'll get on right off and say, well, we have a protocol we have to follow. I'm on here to give you time to express yourself, doc, but we're not going to change this. And then they often just don't understand the mechanisms of the drugs. They don't understand the nuances of the disease. Now, sometimes you can use their ignorance against them, but, it's really sad that we have to go through that kind of thing to just take good care of patients. It's
a game. It just feels like a game, as long as you're willing to persevere and play the game, they'll eventually say yes, probably, but.
So that is true. So if you play the game, they will usually say yes, but they count on the fact that probably 80% of doctors won't play the game.
Yeah, you don't have time.
You don't have time, which is why we really like having our medical home, because it gives us, more resources. There's now 3 of us playing a game, so it's 3 on 1. So I tell the doctors in my clinic, if you've got a patient that's just driving your nurse nuts, that's the patient I want in the medical home. Give me your worst patients, because we'll spend the time, to get their drug approved, to do all the hoops that we have to jump through. And if we're unsuccessful, we're unsuccessful, but it won't be because we caved.
Right. I'm one of those patients. I message my doctor's office in advance. By the way, it's almost time to renew my medication, and the insurance company will deny it. So why don't we start now so that you can get the appeal process and I won't miss a dose or be late or anything like that. So
yeah, absolutely. I have that conversation with patients all the time. I tell them, I'm going to write for this drug and it's going to get denied. And we're going to appeal it and it's going to get denied. And then we're going to write a letter and it's going to get denied. And then we're going to do a peer-to-peer and we're going to get you on your drug. But don't get upset when you get 5 different denial letters in the mail. It's just the process is the way it is.
Yep.
Because patients call up all upset and you're like, wait, just, you only lost round 1. It's a 15-round fight.
Right. Yep. I'm like, let's just start this fight a little bit earlier just to make sure I don't miss a dose. If we can this time. If I cannot miss a dose this time, that would be great.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and I will also say a lot of the pharmaceutical companies are so generous with samples, and then these are expensive. I mean, you think I hand someone a pen of one of these injectable drugs, you're handing them enough money to put my kid through college, not 1 year.
At least.
Yeah.
20 grand at least.
Yeah, you're handing them a semester of college and a pen. And so the pharma companies are profit-oriented trillionaires. I get it. But they're also very generous and in general, very patient-forward and patient responsive to these sort of problems. Now, they can't take care of a patient forever, but they can certainly get you a dose here or there to get you past the stupid prior auth problem you have with your insurance company.
Yeah. I'm going to take us off this topic because it's kind of like the book that I was listening to that I just had to stop because I'm just getting mad.
Yeah, me too.
You talked about mechanism of action. You brought that up at some point. And so I am curious, in the new medications that you are looking at now that you're exploring, are there different mechanisms of action that are just super unique and not something you've looked at before?
Yeah, I mean, there's a few out there. The probably the most unique one right now we have going on is a mechanism called TL1A, which is also the one that has the marker for response. And so we're really excited about that. And there's several companies that have those sort of drugs in development. There are sort of improvements on the standard ones, like we currently have an S1P on the market, but version 2.0 and 3.0 are both coming out in trials. So those aren't new mechanisms, but they're relatively new because the first one just came out a year ago. And then there's preclinical data on all kinds of other mechanisms. There's an IL-36, there are a variety of different things that they look at. And I actually just got back from Digestive Disease Week yesterday and met with several different companies showing me, preclinical stuff on things that they may think go into trial in a year or 2 or 5 or whatever. So I think there's always some brilliant chemist somewhere, biologist, coming up with these things, and it's just a matter of seeing which ones rise to the top. Because most of they spend hundreds of $1 millions on drugs that never ever make it into a person. But that's that's how you figure it out.
Yes, that is the nature of science. Is there's a lot of trying things that don't actually go anywhere or do anything.
And if there's anything that we've learned from virology and from cancer, is that sometimes there's not a drug. Sometimes it's a combination. Sometimes we need to be using 2 different drugs in combination. And some of my colleagues out there do combination therapy a lot. I do it on rare occasion, but I think down the road it's going to become very, very common to combine a JAK inhibitor with a lymphocyte trafficking drug, or a JAK inhibitor with an IL-23 or something like that. And I think that's where the future is going to lie for many, many patients who don't respond to conventional single line therapy.
So here's my question, and I'm not sure that you can do this, but you said TL1A, SW1P. That's a lot of letters and numbers together that don't actually mean anything to me. So are you able to take that and translate it, or is this just is it too hard?
The answer is I probably am not. So a TL1 is a drug that works in a sense like a TNF blocker, like the standard Remicade. It's TNF superfamily, but it's like Remicade. And I'm not an immunologist, so I cannot give you the fine points of that. The S1P is very interesting. So S1P, how lymphocytes find something that's inflamed is they follow a signal in the bloodstream that leads them to inflammation, much like Hansel and Gretel following crackers to get out of the forest. And so that trail of crackers is something called sphingosine 1 phosphate. So it's S1P. And so these lymphocytes that cause inflammation follow the trail of S1P to where it gets most concentrated, and that's where the inflammation is. So these drugs now block the ability for the lymphocytes to pick up the trail.
That's so cool. Thank you. That was a great explanation. I appreciate that.
I understood that. I appreciate that explanation very much.
They're a very cool class of drugs. And I think that's one of the fun, that's one of the reasons I do my job. I'm a nerd. I love the science. I love understanding how these things work. I wish I had done a fellowship in immunology, but I'm way too old now to go back.
Never too old.
You beat me to it. Never too old. Never.
It's funny. My last kid went off to college a couple of years ago. My wife went back to school.
That's great. Are they going to graduate together? That'd be so cute.
Just about probably within a few months. So
cool.
she was an attorney, but she hadn't practiced in years and she didn't want to be an attorney anymore. So she went and got a degree in library sciences, and she's a librarian at the Dallas Law Library. So
I'm pretty sure you just described my sister-in-law's dream job right there. Like, she's also a lawyer that never took the bar, and she would love to work in a library. So I should get my sister-in-law and your wife together. They would get along.
Yeah, my wife she practiced about 10, 15 years. And she said, yeah, I want to stay with the kids. And now she doesn't want to go back. So
fair. That's another tough profession. I'm curious if there was any, because I was on LinkedIn, I don't know, dinging around doing something. And I saw there was a company that has a capsule, a drug delivery capsule that goes all the way down and into your gut. And so it's like a gut delivered medication. Did you hear anything about that at DDW?
I did not. I've heard about that peripherally before. I've never really looked into it, but okay. You got to figure those sort of things are coming. But there's just a lot of smart people out there figuring these things out. So that doesn't surprise me.
Interesting. All right. Well, if you find something about that, let me know, because I'm curious about it. I think the thing I saw on LinkedIn was that it wanted me to invest in it. And so the company is still pretty new.
Yeah, I'll pass on that.
I thought about it. I was like, listen, this is kind of cool. I like it. It reminds me of my submarine, my new movie with the submarine, one that I still haven't exactly figured out.
Yeah, so I when I started doing clinical trials, I actually sold every medical stock I owned because I just didn't want there to be a conflict.
That's actually really smart of you because you never know when that could come up.
You just don't want to run the risk. Someone somewhere will have a problem.
I wanted to go back to your medical home concept. So this is very cool sounding. So tell us more about, what do you mean by medical home? What does that constitute?
I mean, this all goes back to work that was done by Miguel Reguero at Pittsburgh when they had these sort of medical homes. So it's basically you enroll a patient in a system that provides many different options for the patient. And so what we do is our home consists, well, first of all, across GI Alliance, we're building multiple of these. We've got one in Phoenix, we've got one in Dallas, we've got one in Baton Rouge, Chicago. And basically we know that the more contact or the more touches you have with the patient, the more likely you are to keep them engaged with their therapy, to keep them out of the emergency room. A lot of times the patient will go to the ER and what they really just need is some fluids. So you just have them come in the office, give them 2 liters of fluids, or they really just need to bump their steroids back up for a few days until we can get a little bit more of their medication on board, or they just need to be checked for C. diff. I mean, there's so many things that can be going on, or they're just anxious. They just need to talk to our social worker and get their anxiety under control. I mean, so the medical home concept is that you've got all these different resources right together. The patients, so when a patient of ours gets enrolled in the home, they get a number to the bat phone, to the phone for the home, where they can reach our nurse practitioner or our nurse anytime, day or night, weekends, non-weekends, holidays, Christmas, and can get their questions answered. At the same time, we don't wait for them to call. We call it the hot list. We've got patients that we know have been having trouble and are at high risk for having more trouble. It could be someone that's doing perfectly fine, but they just started a new medication. Or it could be someone that's really been struggling a lot. And so we make a point of calling them sometimes 2 or 3 times a week, more commonly once or twice a month. But it allows us to stay engaged so that if they're going to miss a dose of their injection, we would like to know about that a day ahead of time, not 3 weeks later, so that we can tell them, oh yeah, sure, just come up and get a sample and we'll figure out what's going on. That sort of thing. Also, most insurance companies will not cover in any meaningful way the costs associated with seeing a dietitian, or will not cover in any meaningful way, certainly the cost of mental health care. Mental health care in this country is horrendous, and nowhere in this country is it worse than Texas. And you cannot get an insurance company to cover some very basic stuff that helps patients, because these are chronic diseases. They're ill, and they have anxiety, and they have depression, and they have all kinds of social determinants of health that impair them from getting good care. So what insurance companies do have, to their credit, and Medicare is actually one of the best at this, are chronic care management codes. So there are specific codes that allow us to, instead of billing for an ICD-9 code for a diagnosis, we can actually just bill for the time we spend. And that means the dietitian can actually bill for the time she spends. She doesn't bill for dietary services so much as she bills under the chronic care management codes. And so now they can see a dietitian and they can see a social worker, but they have to actually enroll. They have to physically enroll. There's a consent and all this other stuff, and they have to meet specific criteria, but every IBD patient meets the criteria. I mean, they have at least one problem, at least one medication, and usually a second or a third problem. And so we use this sort of chronic care management model to get the really high risk patients access to therapy that they weren't going to have just by using the routine fee-for-service model of insurance companies. And so we're trying to build out these chronic care management-based medical homes around the practice for these high-risk patients. And then, the idea is, 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, are doing really well. They just unenroll from the home, and go back to routine care. And the home doesn't interfere with the routine care either. So my partners can send me the patient for the home. It doesn't stop them from seeing the patient. It doesn't stop them from doing their colonoscopy. It doesn't stop them from, participating in the medical decision. It just provides the patient access to many, many, many more touch points and a very easy and hopefully trusting relationship. And that really is what it comes down to. It really just comes down to building a trust with the patient that we're there to take care of them. And we want them to call. I think patients sometimes are just afraid to call or too busy to call. And we're like, no, you need to call. If you got a problem, you call. Just call. If there's not a problem, then that's fine. So you had a phone call. But it just it sort of encourages, and along with calling, what it encourages is the patient becoming themselves invested in their care. You don't want them just dwelling on how sick they are all the time, but you want them invested in the processes that are leading to them to getting better. And that's really what the home is supposed to facilitate.
I love that. I just told someone recently as last week, after living with IBD for over 20 years, like, I'm tired. I would love it if my doctor's office called me sometimes and was like, hey, you haven't had lab work in a little while. You should probably come in and get that done. I moved recently, and so that involves a whole bunch of finding a primary care, finding my GI, finding my, all these other things that I have to see because of my IBD. And so I love that you're calling it a home and that it is that involved and you're that proactive for your patient. Because I'm tired, y'all. I'm tired of having to do all that stuff after 20 years.
Not only that, the other thing the home does is, we all know the cornerstone initiatives, right? We all know all of the routine healthcare things that IBD patients are supposed to do that has nothing to do with their disease, like getting a pneumonia vaccine. If you look at most practices, we don't do a very good job of that. And so one of the first things that happens in our home is we go through the whole cornerstone. Have you seen a dermatologist? Have you had your mammogram? Have you had your pap smear? Have you had these vaccines? Have you had recent blood work? Have you had a vitamin D checked? Have you, just bang, 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 bang. And we're on top of that. And well, I don't have a dermatologist. Here's the number. And I'm going to call you next month to make sure you've done it. That sort of thing. And so we're hoping, in fact, this is our next project. We're hoping to have a poster at either AIBD or CCF where we take 50 patients in the home and 50 patients not in the home and say, what is the rate of vaccination? What is the rate of derm exams? And just, we would like to be able to show that we do a good job. And so we'll see how that goes.
And how many of those people had to go back on steroids or ended up in emergency rooms? That is also big.
Whole different question. That's huge. Yeah, it's huge. I mean, if you just because every patient that goes to the ER, there's three things that are guaranteed. They're going to get a narcotic, they're going to get a steroid, they're going to get a CT. And that's probably three things they didn't need. And it just happens over and over and over. And so if we can get them not to go to the ER, maybe we'll still give them a steroid, but we may give them a whole lot less and get them off it a lot quicker.
I really love this. I mean, in a previous life, I worked for a nonprofit organization where I did a lot of care management, which was the whole helping people find resources and those sorts of things. And it's because the doctor's offices didn't have this thing like you're talking about that really would be the thing that helps them find, patient assistance programs or helps them make sure their insurance company is giving them mobility devices if they need it, those sorts of things. So I just think this is really exciting.
Another thing our group is doing is we're actually setting up with our group a nonprofit foundation whose sole goal is to take all of our mid-level providers and educate them about the IBD homes and educate them about all the IBD care so that we can metastasize this across the network. Because it doesn't do anybody, we're 1,600 providers. Me having a home in Dallas doesn't change the bar. But if I can have 40 of these things across the country, that changes the bar. And so we're going to set up a nonprofit educational foundation to just educate all of our mid-levels, educate all of our doctors, and then educate all of the patients about how to use this and access it.
I think that's fantastic. And I think especially now that so many people are used to doing things online too, that even if you have a home in Dallas, there could definitely be things that people could be getting from you that are not in Dallas that are further away.
99% of what the home does is done by phone.
Exactly. You don't need them to come to you.
Yeah. If they've got, pain around their bottom, you got to come in the office and take a look. That's just the way it is. But almost everything else can be handled. Why did my medicine get denied? Well, probably someone filled the form out wrong. Yeah. Usually it's something as simple as that. And so
they forgot to put the period before the 0 or whatever it is. It's so dumb.
They left off their birth date. Not that the insurance company doesn't have 50,000 other copies of their birth date, but they on this form left off their birth date. It's just dumb stuff that can be easily fixed. You just have to know about it ahead of time. So we're really, really, really excited about the home because then we want to be able to take that model and look at our outcomes and go back to, Blue Cross or United, and also go back to Walmart and Fidelity and American and say, hey, here's what we're doing for your patients. And here's what we need from you. We need you to leave us alone when we want to write a medication or that kind of stuff.
This is so cool. I really love this. Yeah, I think your patients are going to benefit immensely from this program. Cool.
Yes, agreed. I want to bring it back. I have said several episodes now, I don't want to pass that by or gloss that over and just let it run. So I kind of want to bring one thing back to the clinical trials, because the way that you explained it, it made it so much easier for me as a patient to understand. I sincerely appreciate your explanation, but So the patients who are listening to you when you publish this episode, if they're interested in being a part of a clinical trial, is there a way for them to talk to their current physician or to reach out or to find one? I mean, how would you recommend that a patient who's interested find out more?
Yeah, so several things. First of all, there are many resources. On the website clinicaltrials.gov is every clinical trial being run in the country that is under FDA supervision. So they could just go there, put in Crohn's disease, pull up hundreds of trials. Well, that's too many, but that's a start. They can look at the trial, they can find out from there who's doing it and that sort of thing. The Crohn's Colitis Foundation has a clinical trials place where you can go there, put in your disease, put in your zip code, and find doctors near you that are doing clinical trials. I work for the GI Alliance. Our website has all of our clinical trials on it. It's being revamped right now, so give us a couple of weeks to know. And so we're certainly happy. I don't want to use this podcast to promote my particular site, but I never mind being contacted, but they can look me up if they want. But we've got trials all over the place, and are always open to just discussing these options with patients. But there's a lot of stuff out there. I will say, be careful when you go to Dr. Google and on internet searches and vet the trials appropriately. If you find a trial you really like on the internet, please go to clinicaltrials.gov and make sure it's a legitimate trial that's going on somewhere that you want to be a part of. But yeah, a lot of doctors think that clinical trials are only going on at academic institutions, and that's not the case anymore. Many private GI practices are running these trials, and they're doing them because they've realized there's a huge value to their patients.
Super. That's really helpful. And I know the clinical trials community site on the Crohn's and Colitis Foundation's website has patient education videos. So if you're curious about learning the different phases of clinical trials or learning more about what you've already said, I think there's some really great videos on there too.
And I'll say, again, I'm not trying to drum up business for myself, but I go all the time and talk to groups, whether it's a CCF support group or whatever. I talk about clinical trials all the time. I mean, if you want me to come talk to your group, I'll come talk to your group. I want to spread the word. I think I'm passionate about this, and I am very happy to sort of be a preacher preaching the gospel about clinical trials and about advancing medicine.
Because you said it that way, I will say that is the way that we get new treatments. So anybody who's listening, who's wondering, oh, well, why would I do that? Because we do not have new medicine without clinical trials. That's it. That's the only way we get it.
I've got news for everybody out there. We're all going to get something someday. Would you like to have something new and cool for whatever it is you're going to end up with? This is how medicine advances. It just is.
This is how it is. Yes.
Oh.
Very, very interesting. And we love talking to science nerds. So you're welcome back anytime, Dr. Ritter. We appreciate it.
Sure.
All right. Last question that we ask everybody is, what piece of advice would you have for, in your case, either the patient community or the provider community or all or both communities? You can do all of the above if you want.
Yeah, I think I have the same advice for both doctors and patients. The biggest mistake we make in inflammatory bowel disease is we don't treat early and aggressive. This is a progressive, destructive, horrible disease, and you can't just sit on it and think that, well, maybe this will work. You need to assess the patient, assess the severity, and be aggressive early to get these diseases under control. You don't wait to see if a cancer spreads before you decide how aggressive you're going to be to treat it. You assess the cancer, you treat it, whether it's surgery or chemo or radiation or whatever. It's the same thing with inflammatory bowel disease. If you get at it early on, you can prevent a lot of the destruction, a lot of the complications, and probably have far better success with medicines that you're going to fail with later on.
That is really good advice. And this is this episode reminds me of our episode with Smita Mehta, where I was like, I have so many emotions right now. I'm a little bit angry about some of this, but I'm super hopeful, and I just love how passionate you are. And so I just so many emotions right now. It makes me happy that people like you are doing this work and that are this passionate and hopeful. And then I'm still going to be mad at the insurance companies after we hang up. Sorry.
Yes, still mad at the insurance companies. But I didn't think I was a science nerd, but I love listening to researchers talk about their research because of how passionate you are. No one will be able to see you, but they'll be able to listen to it and hear it in your voice. It is inspiring to listen to you talk about the research. It's inspiring.
I tell my partners all the time, my partners will say, well, I don't think they're interested in a trial. And I'm like, if you get them in front of me for 5 minutes, I'll sell them on a trial.
I mean, I want to be part of an IBD trial, and I don't have IBD right now.
I know. Yeah, I know. It's it's a very challenging but incredibly fascinating time to be in medicine in general.
Yeah. I agree. I agree. And we see that with all of the new medications that are coming out. We see that with, the fact that we're this close to being able to use genetic markers to be able to say, this is the treatment for you. God, that's exciting. That's so exciting.
Yeah.
So cool. Well, Dr. Ritter, thank you. Really, thank you so much. This was such a fun conversation, a little bit infuriating, but not because of you.
Yes. This was great.
Hey, Bowel Moments fans, this is Alicia, and we need your help. Help us grow our show by sharing with your friends, rating, reviewing, and subscribing. Thanks.